Hi everyone, I'm Tara.
Hi, I'm Michelle. Welcome back to our podcast, Books and Beyond with Bound, Season 4.
Yes, and where we speak to some of the finest writers in India and now in the subcontinent and find out what makes them tick.
Yeah, Tara and I are editors, podcasters, storytellers.
And through Bound, we help you tell your stories out into the world. I mean, this is something that both of us are super passionate about because we've been editors for a really long time.
Absolutely. And we've also built so many creative communities, right, Tara, across platforms. And we have two WhatsApp groups now. They're called Bound Writers Circle and Pod Squad.
Yeah, and I love engaging in these WhatsApp groups because, it's full with so many interesting readers, writers, and we talk about such interesting topics. It's buzzing, We recently covered the benefits of close reading in our group, and we had readers sharing pictures of their annotations, highlighting sentences, debate, discussions, writing notes.
Yeah, and the second group is for everyone who loves podcasts. It's all about podcasts, those who want to listen to more podcasts, who want to start their own podcast. It's going to be amazing.
Please feel free to join our community. The links are in the show note. It's for anyone who loves stories. If you're a listener, reader, please feel free to join.
Yeah, and Tara, I mean, apart from these groups, I think this podcast is like the highlight of my day, right? And I was just checking the stats, Tara. We are actually trending in 11 more countries. That's like 27 in total. Wow, I can't believe
I know. I checked the stats too, and what a great way to start off the season. We have listeners from UK, Canada, Singapore, Sweden, and more. Right, Michelle? What are the other
and also countries like Czech Republic, Macedonia, Kyrgyzstan, and I actually googled how to pronounce the name because I had never heard of these before. I mean, who would have imagined? And if you, our listeners, are from one of these countries, please do reach out to us. We would love to feature you on our episode.
Absolutely. I'm so looking forward to one of those conversations. We have over 135k downloads now. So thank you for everyone who stuck by us. And I really do hope you enjoy season 4. So let us now look at a listener who's been with us all throughout. She's Surabhi Geetey. She's from Bangalore. She's a product manager for Easy Rewards, and she's a big bookworm.
Yeah, I mean, we love people who reach out with fan mail. That is something that keeps us going. And Surabhi is one of those who messages after every episode. That's so sweet of her, Tara. So what we're going to do today is after that episode, we're going to do a fun rapid fire round with Surabhi so that, all of you get to know her better. We get to know her better. And I'm so glad we're doing it on video. It feels amazing to, actually look at you face to face because just to give you guys a disclaimer, we've been working from home now for over a year. So it's really good to actually see someone and converse, right? So, I'm absolutely thrilled about the season that's coming up, but we also covered so many interesting episodes in the previous season. Just to give our listeners a little bit of an overview, we covered writers from so many places, so many intense stories that have, never been heard before, from places like Kashmir, Pakistan, small villages in Goa, and so many nuanced themes like class differences, mental health, partition, and so much more. But this season, we have covered, a variety of more episodes, and Tara is going to tell you more about it.
We've blended a lot of different topics this time, from food writing to women in the army to somebody who's written an advice book on dating. Someone's written a book on walking through Kabul. We have Amitav Ghosh discussing his books that deal with climate crisis. We have Kavita Rao, who deals with women doctors in India. We have some fantastic debut fiction, some very pedigreed fiction as well. So we really wanted to give a holistic and different view this time into different writing styles and also different creative processes.
Yeah. And actually, all these conversations, Tara, they made me, revisit my own writing and see how I can reinvent my style, because you kind of get, stuck into your own zone and style. But all these conversations have got me thinking a lot, actually.
Yeah, actually, even for me, because like my mind is always racing into like 100 ideas. And I'm looking like, I think I'm like desperate looking for like a project, apart from work that I can hold on to. And I feel like all of these people have done that so well, and they've contributed so much. I mean, just take Taran Khan, who, has, she's taking the reader through streets of Afghanistan. You visit its libraries, graveyards, its archaeological sites, and
Exactly.
it's just an experience that you would never have, right? But through all these conversations, we realized that something really stood out to both Michelle and me that's very dear to our heart. And that is the topic of how gender is navigated in books. And that is what we are going to unpack today. We're going to talk about, have things really changed? How have they changed? What can we do to portray gender better? This episode, we've also covered a lot of women doing different things. We have an episode which covers, women in the army by Tanushri Podar, and many more interesting topics.
And I really liked how when we started talking about it, we narrowed it down to even Indian female characters written today, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to analyze these Indian female characters through the lens of the Bechdel test. Now, for all our listeners who are maybe aware of, maybe have heard of the term in passing, there is a cartoonist by the name Alison Bechdel, and she is one of my role models, because apparently what she did was, cartoonists have columns in newspapers, right? They have in newspapers, in magazines, all of that. And through one of these comic strips, what she did was she portrayed two friends, okay, two female characters who want to watch a movie, and then they decide, okay, so which movie do we watch? And they had three criterias in mind. Okay, so it's very simple. Okay, it goes like this. So the first thing is there should be two women in the movies, and both of them should be named, right? Now they should be having a conversation, and the conversation should be about anything apart from a man, right? Like, I mean, come on, this sounds basic, okay, but what happens at the end of the cartoon strip is they do not find any movie that does that, and so they end up not watching anything. And that was revolutionary. That started this conversation, and it became this thing where every movie and every story became came under the scrutiny of this test or this radar. And that's how stories started evolving. I mean, isn't that mind-blowing, Tara?
Yeah, and it's so funny that you would think that it would be very easy to pass this test, because it's literally, two women who, like us, named, talking about something other than a man. But it's surprising how many movies, how many books, how many shows do not pass that test even today. This test was created years and years ago.
Yeah, Tara. And actually, what I find the most interesting in this is it actually started out with movies. Okay, so it was just a test for movies, but then it, went on to analyze books as well, right? And I'm a big movie buff. Okay, I watch a lot of movies, and I don't really remember the exact time when I came across this test. Like, I'd heard of it, but after reading more about it, and after really understanding the place of women in history and being more aware in that way, I think I started looking at stories in a way that I wouldn't have earlier, right? So, when we're in college, we, binge watch a lot of movies because our friends are watching it, right? It's almost a, a very social kind of thing when you watch movies or even read books, right? So there are a lot of book clubs that recommend books. And then sometimes you wonder, okay, why are we doing this? So I took that step back and I started really thinking about movies.
And those are really the one off. But I want to move us to, this concept of whether, the Bechdel test is really relevant even today. And how, sometimes in shows and books, this whole sort of portrayal of women can be very one dimensional and stereotypical, even though it passes the Bechdel test. So for example, we have, it's sort of like this trope of this independent woman has been weaponized in a way, or commercialized. And I always sort of post this on Twitter and always think about it, because nowadays the definition of an independent successful woman is always one type of person. She is this promiscuous sort of, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't represent, and since we're speaking about representation, it doesn't represent all of us today. She's promiscuous, she smokes, she drinks, and that is sort of associated with being a certain way. I'm independent, I don't smoke, I don't drink, where am I on screen, where am I in books? And I feel like books are actually taking sort of books are actually a better base for women to be represented than movies, especially with the kinds of writing that we're seeing coming out of India today. Whether it's Amrita Mahale's Milk Teeth, which had a women reporter, and she purposely chose that profession for her woman character as a civics beat reporter, so that the character could roam around the cities. And that was a purposeful choice by her, which I found very interesting, that these women writers are making these sort of purposeful choices to really say something about, or break boundaries in a way.
No, absolutely, really, really good point. And you know what this also makes me think about, Tara, is whenever a female writer ends up writing good male characters, okay, like the male gaze, and they're always complimented in a way that, oh my god, like how could a woman write a male character that well, right? So I recently read a very interesting article on Scroll, actually, by Ipshita Nath, who's the author of The Rickshaw Reveries. And she said that, because she wanted to portray Delhi, she wanted to portray a certain, vibe of Delhi being very patriarchal. She had to do that. But then she would love to have a world where, masculine and feminine genders or identities are just mixed up. I think these binaries also that we set are really, really difficult at times, right? Really problematic in
But do
India.
you think that the Bechdel test needs to be updated? Because I really feel like, it's bare minimum nowadays. Don't you think that this is something that, we need to upgrade it?
Absolutely, that is just the first step, right? Always you take an idea that is revolutionary, but then you make changes to it, you adapt to it. And I think in a world, honestly, in the 21st century, where everything is fluid, where everything is evolving at such a pace, where where Instagram is changing probably every second, right? Like probably in the next moment reels won't be relevant anymore. I think we really need something that needs to be updated, but it's always a good checkpoint to go back to. So for me, the way the Bechdel test has worked is, it's not something that is rigid, or it's not like a black and white test, but it always gives me food for thought. It makes me think about the female characters a little more.
And I also think about the books that do not pass this test, but which are not necessarily problematic. We always say that books that do not pass this test, movies that do not pass this test, they are somehow bad, or they're not doing a good job. What about the books in which the whole point, of the book was to portray a certain reality, which is centered around, the female relationship with men, in a historic, especially this happens a lot in a historical context, right? So we have characters like, I love Indu Sundarsan's books, which basically talk about, Mughal wives, right? So they are always operating within the context of the relationships in the harem, in the zanana, and they're always talking about, men. Same with Chitra Banerjee's Rani Jindan. She's a very powerful, feminist warrior woman. But, we enter her story and we are navigated through her story because through her relationships with men. Men are how she got power, and that is simply a function of historical context. So I found it very interesting also that we can't apply these sort of stamp or sticker on everything, because everything has to be taken into its historical context.
I would like to differ with your thoughts slightly, because one thing that stayed with me throughout was how she navigated the female power hierarchy in the, because she was the youngest queen, right? So there were so many conversations that happened, through other women, through other helpers in the court, in the palace, where they were talking about mundane things like duties, like what they had to do, and that had nothing to do with men. Of course, the man was at the back of the mind, right? So it is problematic. Definitely, it has this agenda that you need to get a man's attention in order to do all these things. But there were so many interesting conversations that happened that really made me think about how women navigate households, right? You cannot get work done until you navigate a woman's space. And I think even exploring that, right? Like, what is a woman's space? Is it just a kitchen? Is it just the ordinary duties that you have to do? So it did made me think about all of these things.
I feel like it isn't problematic, because you're actually portraying something in its reality. And I think that, and this brings you to a larger question of what are the themes, what are the topics, what is problematic in literature itself. And we had a very interesting conversation with Anubha when we spoke about this in her episode, because she's portrayed very sensitive topics, like suicide, etc. And we asked her, does your book need a sensitivity reader? What do you think about writing about these sort of topics which can come with trigger warnings? And she said, it's a reflection of the society it's in. So I find it's very different for somebody who is writing as a reflection of society versus writing a uh, very sort of contrived book about, maybe that, we would have seen 20 years ago about a romance where, they're only speaking about men, written by a male character. So that's where I really think the difference is. Whether they focus on the Bechdel test or not, I think is irrelevant. But I think what is relevant is the sense of agency, that these authors instill their women characters and their women figures with, even though they're operating in a scenario where the man is the king, or the man is like, I have to
Exactly,
get to the
that's what.
man to like get my
Yeah.
power. The man will say if I'm the top begum or not.
It makes me think about how women are portrayed in crime. And I often, I've noticed, of course, I'm not a huge crime buff. And, I'm sure our listeners, big crime fans, would probably differ with me. And I would love to know other points of view. But I've noticed that because crime, like any other genre, is male dominated. You have mafia as men, criminals as men. Women are always the victims, and I've always seen this in movies and books when women are objectified, right? Women are raped, women are killed, and we are always on the back seat. But I have noticed things change in a way which I think it's definitely, it can improve, Tara. But I really like to see women in power. So, and there are books also like Lullaby by Leela Slimani, which talks about a nanny who raises her children, and then suddenly she kills them, and then and it's actually based on a true story. So I was reading a lot of these reports based on it, and a lot of people said, one thing that stood out was, how can a woman do this? And talking about an Indian book that actually covers a very male sphere, Tara, I think Mafia Queens of Mumbai by Jane Borges is really, really, I would say, for me it was a complete game changer, because I never thought of women as being part of a mafia. Honestly, like for me, that the feeling that you could instill fear in somebody the way men do. I mean, I know I sound I sound evil, but I found that book revolutionary in that way.
So there's gender parity for criminality and violence in women too. I find that very funny. So, the woman who commits the crime, she's always portrayed as, you know, hysterical. If you think of characters like Gone Girl, or you think of characters like the girl on the train,
Neurotic, right? Yeah.
yeah, or girl in the window, they're always sort of these like sad sort of, and they're helpless in their own way, even though they are the sort of agents. They're very much victims, and that's why they're agents. And I find that trope actually that's happening right now in crime, I mean, it makes a very interesting reading. But it's sort of typecasting the kind of woman who acts out, or the kind of woman who becomes a murderer.
Like, I think you mean if they have issues, then they would react in a certain way.
And a
Yeah.
show that actually doesn't do this, which I think really portrays uh, things in a very nuanced way, because I feel like some of these characters can lose their nuance. But I feel like a show that does this really well is Dirty Betty, actually, which is the story of a housewife who ends up killing her husband. And it really does sort of like make you empathetic towards the character. And it's not just sort of like like I felt like Gone Girl was very intriguing in the way that like she was portrayed and you could not relate at all. But I felt like Dirty Betty did portray the character as a human more than a stereotype. So I feel like that is something to look out for in the crime genre.
I have noticed that mental health issues are used, as this propelling point in order for them to even act and do something later on. One book, of course, this is not by an Indian writer, but I would, love to talk about it because it really made me think about how women characters are written, right? So there's this book called Under the Skin by Michelle Faber, and it's also a very famous movie starring Scarlett Johansson. But that's aside. The point is, this character Tara, when I read it, right, like I'm not kidding you, I literally like flipped back to the book jacket, and I kept seeing, is it really a male writer? Because the way he's written it, I felt um that very few writers are able to do that in fiction. So just to give you an overview of her character, she is actually not a human, okay? And I found that so fascinating because for me that was more relatable than any other human character. So she's an alien, she's come to earth, she's just going about her duty. So but the way she's shown that it's kind of it's a satire because it kind of falls into place of what all we are talking about today, because we all have stereotypes, right? We are all boxed into things, and it's shown that even an alien who dresses up as a female falls into that, Tara. So I loved that aspect. I love that that satire where you show that no matter where you go on earth, you will fall into these boxes.
Because there's a lot of conversation about whether men can write women authentically, and this book certainly seems to do that, or whether there are certain problems and vice versa. So what do you think?
So I think, Tara, see, the person that I am, I always pick a book for its plot. Okay, I always first see whether the story appeals to me, the character's journey appeals to me, whether it's written by a woman, man, or by a non-binary character. That's not something that's a criteria for me. But yes, I have noticed differences in the way authors approach work, right? So I would like to mention one book by Sanjeev Sahota. Of course, his latest book, China Room, was longlisted for the Booker. But I actually loved his book, The Year of the Runaways. And one reason is, of course, the just to give our listeners context, the book is about migrants who go to the UK to work. So I'm generally interested in these narratives, migrants going to another place to work. But what I liked about it was there is this female character, okay, called Narinder Ji in the book. And the way he's written it, it really felt like he's understood the character in and out. And the reason I'm saying this is, Tara, in the book, she follows the spiritual journey, okay, which I haven't seen other female characters being portrayed through literature, right? Of course, everyone has their own journey, own struggles, but the way he's done it with this character was really, really different. And I do think that men can write good female characters as long as they do their research right. Of course, there's no way of finding out or of validating.
I do think that men can write good female characters, and he's a great example. But that doesn't go for all books written by men. I find that a lot of books written by men which portray female characters are problematic, in the way that, firstly, I find a lot of, in terms of looks, because I find more proportionally in books written by male authors, the woman is always very attractive, has a very good body, and there is this trope of this manic pixie dream girl that sometimes comes up, where the woman character is sort of idolized, is portrayed as someone who's going to save the man. All of these tropes do end up coming in.
Okay, so I think we've covered very interesting spheres, from history to crime to men writing about women, and this, I think the natural progression is romance, because come on, right? Like, I mean, we all look for love stories. It doesn't matter which genre it is in, we always look for love stories. But then I'm really interested in exploring this particular genre of romance, right? So there's romance writing, and there are so many stereotypes within the genre, right? So it's like there's Mills and Boons came out with so many books, and then I remember a reader telling me that, Michelle, why does a man always have to be aggressive to be attractive? And I said, I don't know, that's a trope, right? So it's very interesting how writers nowadays are changing things. So Tara, have you read any book in the rom-com genre that made you think about these stereotypes differently?
I find romance the most interesting topic to speak about when we speak about these things, because it inherently does deal with relationships. And that is very interesting. And it was sort of historically the most problematic genre when it comes to, things like Mills and Boons, as you mentioned, or romantic comedies, because this is the place where your stereotypes were really perpetuated. And I wonder, I have come across a few books, but I wonder if the genre as a whole is moving or has managed to move beyond these stereotypes, while at the same time retaining the flavor of, the rom-com. One book that I think does this really well is Three Impossible Wishes by Anmol Malik. Because it is a rom-com at the end of the day, but it's so much more than that, because it's sort of couched in this coming of age journey that this character is going through, where she's finding out, what she wants to do. She decides she doesn't want to do accounting. She has hobbies, she has friends, there's a lot of funny incidents, and through that all, the romance is wielded. So nowhere is this girl, a damsel in distress. Nowhere also is she, the weird, nerdy. There's like certain tropes that, writers use, and she's sort of her own person. I know Anmol personally. It reminded me a lot of Anmol herself. And I found that is very refreshing take, on books. I've come across books also that sort of pander to these stereotypes as well. Another book that was very, very interesting to me was the book Paper Moon by Rihanna Monaid. That book was really quite an interesting one to think about, and I don't know the answer, because that book sort of focuses on this woman who's running a bookstore. So it's all about, her ambition for the bookstore. But through the prism of the bookstore, we are taken through her romances with these two love interests which are competing with one another. Now, all of it is around the love interest. It's more love than even Anmol's book. But it has this bookstore as their engine, and her ambition as an engine that chugs along.
One writer that I would love to mention, because we're talking about romance and Indian romance, is Andali Wajid. So she has literally taken romantic stories and she's given them feminist roles, and I love that. I think she's changed the way Indian romance is being written. That's why I just turned 30 and I recently read her book, Turning 30, where it's written in a way which is, I would say, accessible to everyone, just like any other romance book. But these women have their own journeys, they have their own ambition. They're women who want to find their voice in life. They want to just basically do their job well. They have a job, they want to just do it well. So I find that so relatable and so realistic, and of course feminist in a way, right? Because it's their identity,
but it's
nobody
still a romance
else. Yes.
And that's like Anmol's book as well. Okay, so I really think that it brings us back to the question of, do we need to upgrade the Bechdel test? Is the Bechdel test really important? And now I want to bring us to the question of, even if we do pass the Bechdel test, can it still be problematic? Because this goes so much beyond, it's evolved so much beyond this base minimum criteria.
One thing that that comes to mind, Tara, is I have noticed this trend where women are shown in AI, right? So there's artificial intelligence. There are a lot of sci-fi movies, right? Which in their own way, they kind of show that there's this world. Yes, you can probably say dystopian or utopian. Tara, it's always the women's voice that comes across. Be it all these pre-recorded instructions that come out, and one show that comes to mind is Squid Game, which is a very popular show right now. I was heartbroken to not see any woman in power, which is good in a way, because it's a very evil evil
but
plot.
so the voice
Yes.
of the thing was woman.
Yes. So all the instructions, the brutal, the cold instructions that were given to the participants were all in this very soft, sweet, feminine voice. And my God, that just got me so annoyed. And I wondered, why? Why is this always, women are given this a very, I'll say, narrow role, because there's no face, there's no name, it's just a voice, right? You're reduced to a voice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually quite interesting. I wonder why they do that. I'm thinking of even the movie Her, which was a fantastic movie, which is, Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with his AI, who's voiced by Scarlett Johansson, and she has a very attractive voice, and she's great for an AI. That it's very interesting, how women's voices are also sort of used. I also want to talk about, speaking of things that do pass the Bechdel test but are problematic. Nowadays, I've seen this trend of reversing roles, especially in romantic comedies. So there's this movie that came out called He's All That, which is a remake of the movie She's All That. And basically, the premise is that the popular kid takes an unpopular nerd as a bet and makes them one of the most popular kids in class and gets them elected to prom king.
Makeover. Yeah.
Makeover, right? So in She's All That, the unpopular kid was the girl. And in He's All That, the unpopular kid is the guy. And the girl is the one who's sort of doing all of this. But, it still doesn't pass the Bechdel test. It's still about sort of like romance, and it's still a lot about like all of that, except that the woman has gotten power. And it made me think, we're not speaking about power here. We don't want women to be, I feel like there's a mistake that we don't want women to be more powerful than men or less powerful. It makes me think of this book called The Power, which basically it won the women's prize, and it basically explores what happens when women, what would happen, it's fiction, if women actually sort of took over the world. And she explores it and she said, not good. Because if women are on top and men on bottom, there's still somebody who's subjugated and there's still problems. So I feel like this role reversal that's happening right now, I don't know, I find that quite an interesting phenomenon. I get it, but I'm not quite sure if it works.
Yeah, and I feel adding to that, Tara, are you just okay with that kind of role reversal? Like, why? We can be much more than that, right? The answer is not just to flip what's already been happening and to say that, oh, like, okay, so if there's a male vice president, now we have a female vice president. Yay, it's equal, right? It's not that. It's also about, I think, looking at how women can be much more than that. That is where it's problematic, right? They kind of take something that's already there and just flip it and say, okay, yeah, but now I think women should be happy.
I also want to talk about all of these like guilty pleasures, because though we're talking about the Bechdel test and we're talking about what is problematic, what is not problematic, stereotypes, I watch all of it. I'm not going to lie. I am a rom-com queen. So I've literally seen all of the rom-coms, and I'm very, like, I love it. I know I recently rewatched Twilight, which is like so shit because, the main character, she doesn't have any ambition. She doesn't have any friends. She doesn't want to go to college. She doesn't want to get an education. But something about the story is very interesting. So I watched it fully well knowing that, this is not a role model.
Because you like vampires. What
No,
was
I
it?
just found it like fun, like it's
I
like the
get it.
trashy fun. But I am a person who understands that this girl is not a role model, that she doesn't. I'm watching it, I'm cringing. I'm saying, you don't have friends, you don't have. I'm just wondering, what do, like, yeah, because I was just researching, Instagram. They have put out a study where they themselves have noted the bad aspects of their program for teenage girls. So I'm just wondering, like, even though these stories are entertaining, what is our, like, it comes back to the question we always talk about, what is our, like, responsibility to convey gender and to convey body image and to convey women in a responsible way.
Imagine if we grew up amidst that kind of social media culture where you have to do certain things in order to fit in, right? Of course, we had our own things, own problematic things. Like I remember pasting pics of Miss Worlds on the bedroom on my bedroom wall. So of course
I used to love Miss World. I used to watch it religiously.
Exactly, same here, right? Like, I mean, it does make you think that how it influences us, our body image and all of that, right? Because they're perfect. And it makes you think about how beauty is all subjective. But yes, I totally agree that today's generation is I would say exposed to a whole different level of pressure that way. But one thing I wanted to address also, Tara, is we are talking about representing women, for who they are, right? But it also makes me think, what if you don't have the resources to do that? So there was this documentary that I recently saw. It's called Women with Transistors, and it's about the first women who really, I would say, created sound, created music. And I did not know that, right? Because it's again a space where you think it's, men have always been a part of it. But yes, when you talk about engineering, when you talk about sound, music, and all of this, entertainment industry, you always think about men. But that documentary really made me think about, how many women have we missed out on including in our history books, or I'll say even including in archives, just because we don't have the resources. So all were, the whole documentary was based on footage that they had, black and white footage. But what if you don't have them?
And we probably, like we were speaking to Kavita Rao, who's documented the first lady doctors, and this topic came up a lot in that conversation, because she said that, I wanted to include, more details. I wanted to include more doctors, and there just wasn't enough information. And, even to find the information for the 9 lady doctors that she did come across, she said it was hard. I mean, she took us through it, and it just makes you think that, like, I just hope in the future that our stories, and I think that is the case, that future historians will be able to record the stories of women, because I think we are coming out and
Yes.
recording our own stories a lot
Yes.
more.
No, and that makes me think that are probably 20 years down the line, people will come up with another test, something, like an improvised version of the Bechdel test, because our times calls for it, right?
I want to ask you, what do you think about fairy tales? I, again, love all the fairy tales, I'm not going to lie. I've loved them. I've watched them over and over again. But, you don't realize that they can be toxic. I just recently rewatched Cinderella. Again, no friends, no ambition, no college.
Yeah, and she's a victim. Yeah, like I have a very close relationship with Disney cartoons, because I grew up, so my childhood was in Bahrain, and it was pretty boring and lonely. I always envied my cousins back in India who had a lot of friends, like, where they play in groups, right? So I did not. So I grew up on these Disney cartoons. Like I have watched, I think, like more than probably 50 to 100 times each Disney cartoon. So that would be Beauty and the Beast, right? The common ones where you have a lot of remakes nowadays. Cinderella, and the Little Mermaid, right? Now, all of them, Tara, if you notice, it's always at the end, yeah, and Sleeping Beauty, it's always the prince that has to come to their rescue, right? So later on, when I read tropes and all of that, I realized it's a damsel in distress trope, right? I did not even know that something like that existed. And then my whole childhood changed for me. I said, oh, Michelle, did you really, like just spend all of your childhood looking at stories about women who are helpless, who just need a man? And another thing that I learned, two things that I learned, Tara, that made me rethink these classics was Beauty and the Beast apparently was Stockholm syndrome, where, a woman is kidnapped, but then because the abductor is so kind to them that they kind of misconstrue that for love and kindness. So that made me look at that differently. And another thing was Sleeping Beauty, like, duh, it's consent. I had never thought about consent. I was just so fascinated by the fact that the prince will come and kiss her and she'll wake up. It's kind of, but it really makes you think about how problematic it was for women.
I agree with you, Michelle. Like, I loved it, watched it like a lot, and then sort of like somewhere in my teens, I think, like, my bubble burst, and we grew up. I watched, Clueless, 13 Going on 30, Mary Kate and Ashley, name it, I'm on it. And you don't even realize you're getting brainwashed. I remember when I was 13, I went through very low self-esteem because, all I wanted was a boyfriend. And all I wanted was to look pretty, and that was it.
Yeah, no, it does. I think the whole way in which love, or in the way in which I think validation is portrayed in these, in these cartoons especially, because we're at a very vulnerable age, right, Tara? You're not at that age to understand whether it's right or wrong. You're just fed all this information, and then you grow up and you see rom-coms that reinforce these stereotypes.
Yeah, and then
Right?
all you want is a boyfriend.
Yeah. So I think our concept of love, our concept of romance is heavily influenced by all these things. So it really makes you wonder, had we not grown up with all these things, I think our idea of love would have been very different, right? Don't
But
you
I
think?
feel like we've made pretty good. I don't think so, Michelle. I think we made pretty good progress in sort of learning, which
Yeah.
maybe the younger,
Unlearning. Yes.
yeah,
Good point.
maybe the younger generation doesn't need to unlearn. But I feel like we are at a point where we have
Hmm.
learned and then we have unlearned. Though I don't know what to say about Instagram. It's just so toxic for young women today. That's another whole 1 hour episode.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
want to speak about female friendships because a big part of the Bechdel test is about, do two women speak about anything other than men? And, what about female friendship? And makes me think about Sex and the City, which is again one of my favorite shows. Yes, now you guys all know what I watch. Love that show, love it. And it's about female friendship, but they only talk about men. Um, I think it's also like the level of acceptance. Each of the characters is very different. And they all sort of accept each other's quirks and differences. Like Samantha's like really promiscuous, and Charlotte is kind of a prude, and yet they're like best friends. And I really like that, like how close they were. They were with each other for everything. And that's sort of like also aspirational and idealistic. And of course, New York City and all of these things as well. But it's really funny because talk about stereotypes. Anyone who's a fan of the show, they'll always ask you, are you a Carrie? Are you Miranda, Samantha, or Charlotte? And I'm like, bit of both, bit of all,
Yeah, no, and that reminded me of Friends actually. Like I know that Friends has its own problematic things, but one thing about female friendship there was how Monica and wow, I
Rachel.
just went blank.
Rachel,
Yes, Rachel.
Rachel.
I was going to call Jennifer Aniston. Yeah, okay. So what I really liked about Monica and Rachel's friendship is how again they are poles apart, right? She's shown, of course, they're in their own stereotypes, right? Where Monica is a controlled freak, she cooks well, and Rachel is a fashionista and judgmental in her own way. But I really liked how they show that two very different people can just bond because they are females, right? That essence of female friendship, I think, is something that transcends personalities, right? So usually when I pick friends, I obviously go for personality, right? If the person is if like me, even if your interests don't match, it's okay because probably, you'll find topics to talk about. But I think what's interesting in all these shows or even in books, right? So if you talk about recent books, Tara, Edina Ferrante in her whole Neapolitan novels, and with I think a lot of contemporary writers. So I think you loved your My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh, where she has this main character and her best friend who keeps coming to her house. I think they have taken female friendship to a level where they've trying to show that that person is there for you, right? That no matter what you go through in life, that person is there. I think that's something that I really admire.
I also want to ask you, what about those female friendships that sort of again are problematic, the fat best friend, the female fat best friend who's always
Oh
very
my God.
jovial, who's sort of has a role to play.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
and also in addition to that, Tara, the gay best friend, that is something that really annoys me.
So are you a Betty or a Veronica?
So growing up, I've read a lot of Archies, Tara, and definitely among Betty and Veronica, I wanted to be Betty because she was always shown as this girl who's, cute, hot, but also nice in a way. I don't know because I was very small, when
Same.
I read these. And what was with Veronica? Didn't they show her in this very didn't they like slut shame her, which I find very problematic,
Yeah,
right?
I think
Didn't they
I
do
mean,
that?
yeah, I think they did do that, but they sort of showed her as this very spoiled, hot girl.
Right. This
And
temptress. Yeah.
I
But
don't know the
another,
answer.
another show comes to mind, Tara, the Scooby Doo. Okay, so there are these two girls who are quite opposite of each other, right? So basically, one girl is super smart. She's the nerd. She finds all the answers to all the mysteries that come up, and another girl is always just looking for the guy's approval. She's hot, she's smart, and I all I'll admit it, I wanted to be the good looking one. I wanted to
The
be the
hot
hot one.
one.
Yeah, because she gets all the attention of the guy. Okay. But at the same time, even though I was quite young when I watched the show, it did make me think about why should a smart girl be portrayed as a nerd, right? Why should she be wearing big glasses, always be the one to just, find out the answer? So
I
that
have
was,
another thing which I used
yeah,
to really identify with. The
okay.
nerd is an ugly duckling who always becomes really beautiful, like Princess Diaries or like other. And like I like thought that that's my life story because like even I was like and I had glasses and things, and then I got a makeover, and then I like became like pretty and everything. I mean, like I got started getting more attention or whatever. But like it's like why do we have to put ourselves into
Exa-
these like life stories, or like
exactly.
why are we focusing so much on like all of these things when we can be focusing? And I feel like today's generation, maybe like we're speaking really like old people, but maybe they're focusing on like in their teenagers planting trees, you know. uh
That's what, yeah, yeah. No, definitely. And another very, very popular show I really want to mention is Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, Tara, because this Rani Mukherjee being the very pretty one, and Kajol being the tomboy. So the tomboy doesn't get the guy's attention. That's stuck in my head for such a long time,
that's
you know.
another stereotype, the
Exactly.
tomboy.
Exactly. And why doesn't the why can't they show that a man is attracted to a tomboy, right? She's as feminine as any other woman, and this stereotype kept repeating. So there was another movie, I think it was Main Hoon Na. So this girl, Amrita Rao, she
Yes,
has this makeover. You remember that, Tara? The
yes, yes,
scene where
yes.
her sari billows in the wind, and oh my God, I'm like, when will Bollywood grow up?
But I
Really?
just want to end with like speaking about a few more recommendations. So, like,
Yes.
one film that I've loved is Hidden Figures because it was about those three black women who worked in NASA. And it just showed the reality so well, so beautifully. What are some other books, that you would like to recommend?
So, one author that I always recommend to everybody is Janvi Barua. I have been following her work for a very long time. Of course, her book was recently Undertow was last year I think it was longlisted for the JCB prize. But I discovered her work when I was in Bangalore. So I think it's around 7 to 8 years back. I've read all her work, but I will say that in Undertow, what she did with the female protagonist, about somebody who's really gutsy, who wants to just go out there, go into the forest, and she's a wildlife enthusiast. So and I love wildlife, all of that, but I do think it involves a lot of courage and a whole different grit to be part of your system. And she's shown that this girl is very very sure about what she wants in life. But the most interesting aspect is her dynamic with her mother. And I think mother-daughter relationships is something I've noticed in Indian fiction, which is an upcoming thing. So in Madhuri Vijay's book, A Far Field, that was again a thread. Then in Girl in White Cotton by Avni Doshi, that was a thread. And I think more recently, even illuminated by Anandita Ghosh. So I am noticing a certain pattern with Indian female writers focusing on mother-daughter relationships, but they're all done very differently.
Yes,
That
they're
is
all
something I
very
like.
different. Yeah, I wonder what
Yes.
it is about the mother-daughter relationship. Very fascinating. I love Sonia Falero's work. I think she's one of the best authors today. She's written a book called Beautiful Thing, which I've spoken about before as well on this podcast, which follows, the lives of bar dancers in India. And her book, The Good Girls, follows, the the death of these two girls, young girls in Uttar Pradesh. And, she's spent around 5 years touring these villages, speaking to people and uncovering what actually happened. And for a woman to sort of do that, to go into area which is so patriarchal, is amazing. Another one that comes to mind is Tara Kaushal, who did a whole book on why Indian men rape. And she actually spoke to some of these people, and these are women who are sort of traversing boundaries and accessing spaces that you know might have been closed off to them a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Tara and I keep talking about this, we can go on for hours, right? There's so much food for thought, and it really gets us thinking in so many directions. What we would love from all of you listeners is if you let us know whether we have missed out any book that really pushes boundaries in a way that hasn't been done before, or even those books that are borderline woke, but it does make you think in different ways.
And now for our very special section, as we had promised, we are going to speak to Surabhi Geetey from Bangalore.
Yay! Hi.
Welcome, Surbi.
Thank
So
you so much.
this is our fun get to know her round that we thought would be very interesting for our listeners as well. So through this round, we are not just getting to know you, but everyone else, all our listeners all over the world will be getting to know you as well. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I mean, I've been in love with the podcast since forever, and now to be in one of the episodes, I'm super, super thrilled. Thanks for having
We're
me.
really thrilled too, and thank you so much for being such a loyal listener. So let's begin. So we found out a bit about you. We know that you're a product manager in Bangalore.
Right.
So I'm always very interested in how people read. Where do they find the time to read? So you must be having a very hectic schedule. So where and how do you make the time for reading?
Okay. So yeah, right. I am into products, and I work for a startup that works around that's centered around CRM and loyalty, etc. So it's a very hectic schedule that I usually have. But I think people tend to find time for things that they absolutely love, and I've always found comfort and solace in reading. So much to the dismay of my colleagues, I carry my Kindle to office, and I live in Bangalore, so it's pathetic traffic here. So I always have an audio book handy. Whenever I'm traveling to work or traveling back to home after work, I'm always listening to an audiobook. And also, I like sneaking in a few lines here and there between work, so that it's my break time.
Talking about Bangalore took me back to my college days, Surbi, and everyone keeps telling me how bad the traffic is. So I can imagine, but it's see, in a way you do get to read
Yeah, that's
during
true.
your
That's true.
travel
Commute.
time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So also,
That's true.
Surbi, we got to know that you're a tree hugger, which is quite an interesting thing. So can you tell us more about this special feature? When did this start? When did your love for trees really start?
I am obsessed with plants. I just love plants so much. Right now on my desk, I have five. And even in my office desk, I have a lot of plants. And I just love taking care of them. And, believe it or not, I believe in the philosophy that plants grow better if you talk to them, if you name them, if you have a very healthy sort of a conversation with them.
I believe that too, because like they are
Thank
living
God.
things and we don't know the
Yeah,
kind of forces
absolutely.
that might be there. And we are, we always think that we're apart from nature and we are better than nature, but we are the product of nature. We're very much
Absolutely.
part of it. So that's cool.
Yeah.
I like this term tree hugger.
Yeah, and even that applies to animals too. So my parents never allowed me a pet, but in Bangalore, whenever it rains like crazy. So there was a time when in my room I had two cats, seven kittens, and one injured pigeon, all of them at the same time, because it was raining so heavily and they needed my help. Come on. So
I remember when I was a kid, there was a eagle had like sort of like dropped a baby chick
oh.
into the compound of my building. Yeah, so like I remember like
Really? Oh, that
adopting
sounds
it.
scary.
Yeah, I was like obsessed with it. I remember like feeding it. It was injured. It didn't last very long, but yeah, totally relate. So, but we want to know, which books made you a bookworm?
Okay. So I think I've always been a reader, big time reader. I think when I was one of those kids, who pester their parents to tell them a bedtime story before they sleep. And my parents happily obliged. And I started picking up Chanda Mama and Champak and all those comic books every month. So I used to stock up on all those books, and that's how I started reading. And then I discovered Ingrid Blyton, and I went mad. I went crazy. I read everything, everything by her, even though, whatever, later I realized that she might not be a very great author, but I used to love those books so much. And Nancy Drew, I was smitten by Nancy Drew. I think the Nancy Drew stories made me the reader that I am today. I thought she was such a brave girl fighting all odds and everything, and that was really inspiring. And Little Women was, I read the abridged version as a kid, and I think, it's one of the best books out there. I just love it. And Harry Potter was also a huge part of my childhood. So yeah, all of these books
I think,
they have a very special
yeah,
place.
yeah, I think there's so many similarities. Like for me, those were the first books as well. I used to borrow them
Same.
from my library. Yeah, so coming back to books and our podcast, Surbi, because you're so sweet. You write every week with such lovely comments. We were curious, how did you first hear about Books and Beyond?
Right. So, like I mentioned, even though my office and my home are not very far off, it takes me about 1.5 to 2 hours in just traveling, and that's how I discovered podcasts overall in general. And I started exploring bookish content. So, I think last year in 2020 April, I was reading Bombay Balchao. And Spotify randomly recommended me one episode by the two of you in which you were interviewing Jane. And I went crazy. I thought, wow, this is perfect. And that's how I started listening. That was the first episode that I listened to. And it was so serendipitous because after that, I picked up A Girl in White Cotton. And I think one or two episodes later, you've both interviewed Avni
Oh,
Doshi.
wow. So it was really meant to be.
Absolutely. And
That's
even
so amazing.
remnants of a separation. When you were interviewing Achal Malhotra, I was reading remnants.
No
So
way.
it is,
No
Wow.
way.
we are meant to be. And what I really love about Books and Beyond is you pick books and authors so meticulously and so wonderfully that each book, if I've not read that book, I want to read it, and if I am reading it, it's great.
Thank you so much. But I really want to know from you, which three writers would you love us to interview and why, which we've not interviewed?
Okay, so can I include like authors outside of India in this?
Go for it. Go for it.
So, all right. So I think this is the kind of answer. This will change after half an hour if you ask me again. But I think I love Sudha Murthy, not just for her writing, but overall the person that she is. And I think you should definitely interview her. She's amazing. I would love to interview her. And I think Elif Shafak. Oh,
So
sorry.
we have a treat coming for you. We actually
God,
interviewed Sudha Murthy
Yeah.
and it's
God.
going to come out in season 4.
That's
Yes.
amazing. I'm so excited already. And I think Elif Shafak, I love how beautifully she writes about her country, and her stories have so much substance in it. I think it will make for a great conversation. And Elizabeth Acevedo, I think she's awesome. I've read two of her books and I've read them both on audio, and I think she emotes very well. So again, I think that would be a great discussion.
Yeah,
And leave Shafaq, I would love to interview her.
exactly. So
Me too.
now we're going to do a signature rapid fire round with you,
Yay.
Surbi, and you've told us that you really enjoy the rapid fires that we do together. So now for a change, it will be you. Okay.
Great.
So one thing that you learned during the pandemic.
Okay, so I learned to appreciate the Bollywood movies of 70s and 80s. I was a huge skeptic, but my parents made me sit down and watch a lot of them. So yeah, that's one thing. And I also rekindled my love for dancing. I learned Kathak for a brief period. So yeah, I love that.
I also learned Kathak for
Oh,
around
wow.
11 to 12 years. Yeah, I stopped it around 5 to 6 years ago. Would love to start it again.
All right. So which book would you recommend to someone who's having a bad day?
Okay, so I recently read a book called Dial A for Aunties, which is a complete laugh riot. I think you both should read it. I think you will love it. It's amazing. Just give it a go. And I think anything by Ruskin Bond, Tales of Foster Gunge, anything on those lines would be awesome. And also the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's my favorite book of all time. And
Great
great.
recommendations. Okay, so which movie have you seen over 5 times?
Okay, so The Devil Wears Prada is one movie I've watched a lot more times that I would like to admit. And I love Barfi. I think it's a great movie. And Dhamal is my guilty pleasure. It's a great movie. I think it is underrated.
No, I think I love rewatching movies also because every time that I watch it, I notice something different, right? So it's a
Right.
very interesting process to rewatch or reread.
You always get something different, like every time you
Absolutely.
watch your favorite movies. Devil Wears Prada is also one of my all-time favorite movies. And even
And every Christmas I rewatch The Holiday.
I
the
love
movie.
The Holiday. I've seen that also
Yeah.
like so many times.
Best movie.
Yeah. It's also about certain times when you watch it, right? It's the mood you're in, and that
Right.
sets a whole.
Evergreen movies. Okay,
So
let's get
our last rapid fire question for you is: what do you love to do when no one is watching? This is tricky.
Okay. All right. So I think I really like to put my speaker to full volume and dance to some really questionable music, like item numbers. I like
We have
doing that.
all
I
been
do that a lot.
there.
And I
Yeah.
like scribbling, cute animal caricatures, like random doggo pictures. I do that a lot, but I do that alone when no one's watching, because again, they are also very questionable.
Right.
So I
So
love
it
that.
was such a pleasure finding out all these things about you, Surbi. But I heard that you have some rapid fire questions
I
for us.
do. I
Oh
do.
my God. Okay. So bring it on.
So this one I want both of you to answer. What is that one book that you have to read before 2021 ends?
So mine is I still haven't read M and the Big Whom by
Oh,
Jenny
wow.
Pinto, and that is definitely on my list, and that's something that I really want to read before
You should.
2021.
It is amazing. What about you, Michelle?
Okay, so yeah, definitely I went blank there for a second. But now that I think of it, I have bought two books by Lee Child. So it is, these fast-paced thrillers, right? So
Right.
I've always wanted to read more of genre fiction because I'm heavily into literary fiction. So before this year ends, I definitely want to read one of his books.
Awesome. Love it. My second question to the both of you again is, what is your all-time favorite character from a book? Or maybe possibly a crush, maybe, if you had one.
Okay, so my all-time favorite characters are very cheesy. So one
Love
is
that.
so one is from the Princess Diaries, Mia
Oh,
from the Princess Diaries, because
nice.
I think I'm Mia. I mean, I'm not a princess, but like that awkward person who like becomes like has a makeover and all that stuff. That, and the other one is Hermione, because again, like I relate to Hermione, that nerdy like bushy head like person who like loves like books and
Me, actually, of course, as time passes by, our preferences change and all of that. But one character that comes to mind is Kathy from Never Let Me Go by Kazuo
Oh,
Ishiguro, because
nice.
I found so many similarities with her. It was almost like, he knew what kind of, women he's writing about. So she's this very, a little timid character. She's very caring and she's such a good friend. So I could relate on a lot of levels. Yeah, I think that character.
Okay. And is there like a book that you always recommend to everyone and you think it's a book that you want everyone to read out there?
Yes. So for me, it will be this. But now that you've told me, actually, I've not recommended this enough to people, but I would love to recommend this. It is Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates.
What about you, Tara?
So the one that I absolutely love and also meaning to reread is Gone with the Wind. It's a timeless classic, 1,000 pages long, so you
I'm
can
yet to
really,
read it, by the way. I've
yeah,
not read it.
1,000 pages in tiny print, so you can get immersed in this world and be in that world for really long, and I love it.
Awesome. The next question is, do you guys have like that one book where you go like, if you don't like this book, we cannot be friends? Do you have that kind of a book?
I used to. I
Yeah.
used to have Harry Potter, okay, until my absolute best friend who I made in college has never read a Harry Potter, and we like get along in every single thing. Like I speak to her every single day, and she doesn't like Harry Potter, so I've learned to let it go.
Yeah. No,
What about you,
I
Michelle?
I generally don't, like judge people based on their preferences, because I also feel that's where, very healthy discussions happen. Like I would love to know why people like some other writer, for example, I would never try to convert somebody to read my favorite book, but I would always love that.
And are you guys guilty of judging books by their cover? Because I do that a lot.
Absolutely,
Yeah, like I
absolutely.
think it's this aesthetic sense, right? Like when you see something that you really like, maybe you're drawn to I don't know, maybe the colors, maybe the shapes or designs, but I would say I never buy a book based on that, but yes, it does attract my attention.
My last question for you guys is there a popular book that you maybe dislike or don't like as much as, people generally like it?
I love it. I love these controversial questions. I have one. I don't like Ayn Rand, so I don't like the Fountainhead and all that stuff. Doesn't appeal to me.
Oh, I love Fountainhead. What about you, Michelle?
Me, I would say it is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh, because I do know that a lot of people like it, but
Me too.
I
I
felt
love
that
it.
yeah, I know, even Tara's favorite. So I felt that the book could have been shorter. Like, I was kind of, after a point, it felt quite repetitive. So I would say I didn't love the book, but I definitely liked the concept and what she tried to do.
All right. I think, have you guys read The Midnight Library?
Yes, I
No, I
love
have
that
to.
book. It was very, very
It
like
was
it was
that book for me.
feel good. Oh, you didn't
It,
like it? Okay.
Oh,
I
why?
think it became very preachy towards the end, like very preachy.
I can see that. I can see that. And this is why I love having these kind of discussions, because everybody's like, no, I love this book too, but I didn't like this book at all, you know? And like,
Yeah.
yeah, as Michelle said, it's like brings up so many interesting
Yeah.
topics and
Food for thought.
conversations. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you did
All
a
right.
really good job interviewing us. You should, I mean, like,
Really.
amazing. Yeah,
Thank
we
you
should
so
get you
much.
on
I'm so
some more.
happy.
Like,
You
we didn't
should. You
expect those
should.
questions, but yeah, I mean that your choice of question shows what a big bookworm you are. But thank you once again, and we hope that all our listeners also loved getting to know Surabhi.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much, guys.
and we hope to get to know more of our listeners soon as well.
Yes, we hope this episode has got all of you thinking, and especially about the way female characters are portrayed in books, films, music. I mean, in any industry, right?
Yeah, and you know, I'm sure that you and I are going to be talking about this topic for a long time. So the discussion doesn't end here for us, and it shouldn't for you. And for you, we really want to know your thoughts about this episode. If you know of any other tests or tropes that you would like us to cover, or anything related to this topic, or even another topic, actually, please let us know, because we are always looking out, as I said, for new ideas.
Yeah, and Tara, I can feel this adrenaline rush in me just when I'm thinking about our next episode, because our next guest is, Padma Shri winner. He's won the Gyanpith Award, which is the highest literary award in India, 2 lifetime achievement awards, my God, and 4 honorary doctorates. I think I'm dreaming right now. Yeah.
I mean, can you believe it? He's been recognized worldwide. This is an Indian who's recognized worldwide for his contribution to literature. 17 books, more than 17 books to his credit. By now, I'm sure all of you would have guessed who this person could be. It can only be Amitav Ghosh. And we got to interview him, and we're going to find out about this lifelong dedication that he has towards understanding climate change, and a lot more about his life and books.
Yeah, and he's actually covered, climate change in a lot of his books, right? Like Hungry Tide, Gun Island, and in the most recent, The Nutmeg's Curse. And his work has been analyzed by so many scholars, so many students. Wow, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're an Amitav Ghosh fan, if you're thinking, oh, I haven't ever read his book, now is the time to pick it up. And if you want a starting point, or just want, a conversation with your favorite author, this is going to be really, really fun. And so please join us next time.
Yeah, and do not forget to join our WhatsApp groups as well for lots of creative conversation. The links are in our show notes.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. As usual, we are editors, we are podcasters, we are storytellers, and through Bound, we help you create stories and put them out into the world.
Yes, thanks for tuning in to Books and Beyond. We are at Bound India on all social media platforms. We'll be back next Wednesday with Amitav Ghosh.
See you then!